We are recording. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where we have the discussions that inform, entertain, and empower educators to be the change. I am your host, Dr. Will, and I am here today with Karla Vigil. How are you doing, Karla?
Great, and it's Vigil.
Vigil? Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for, I'm cool. I'm cool with that. Okay, all right. Karla Vigil.
No worries. People put an R in my last name all the time. I'm not sure why, but it's Vigil, like a candlelight vigil.
Okay. Hey, that's what I saw. So help me. I thank you. So people, today we will be talking about culturally responsive teaching and the work at an organization that she co-founded where they work with leaders of color. So for those who are watching, will you please introduce yourself, Karla?
Sure. My name is Karla Vigil, and I'm from Providence, Rhode Island, born in El Salvador, though. I'm an educator or former educator, fourth grade classroom teacher, and now I do work around education and consulting, doing one-on-one coaching with teachers in the classroom on how to incorporate blended learning techniques, technology, but more importantly, culturally responsive teaching, which I think is the foundational to really best practices around personalized learning.
Wow. This is going to be good today because, that's part of what our job in terms of the blended learning. And I haven't gone into a lot of culturally responsive teaching. I know some teachers do more than others in terms of bringing in books and people from outside of the school community to talk to their students who are reflective of the students in their classrooms. But I want to know, because you did introduce yourself, but who is Karla Vigil and what drew you to become an educator?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Karla Vigil, first of all, I'm probably what I like to call a gentle rebel at heart. I am a daughter of immigrants, and my parents escaped the Civil War in El Salvador. So we came to this country in 1983, escaping the Civil War, which was the revolutionaries fighting against an unjust government, which my mom was part of in the beginning. So I already had that in my blood. So I was already destined to kind of advocate for social justice issues. I'm also a mother of 3 boys, and so I was a young mom, so I look at myself as an educator in that lens where I was constantly thinking about how do I want my sons to learn, how do I want them to think critically about the world, how do I want them to look at the curriculum that's reflective of who they are to empower them, and that all was rooted out of my experience in my educational journey, which that did not exist. And I grew up in the hood. I had many stories to prove that, and I could speak on that, and we won't go into that today. But, I grew up, in the streets. My friends were local drug dealers and of such like different areas like that. And but my parents always taught me that education was the key. So I was a good schoolgirl, and that's what I did. And I went to school and I made sure I got my education. And so my passion to become an educator came from this experience where I had lack of resources, lack of information, lack of opportunities. Everything was against me, all the odds that you could think of. I was a girl of color, I was an immigrant myself, so English was my second language. So I wanted to make sure, I left my community for a few years, and I wanted to make sure that I could come back and change my community. Because many times we leave with this feeling of like, you know what, I want to escape, I want to make it. Right? And this idea of making it is leaving your community. So I felt like, in a way, I was running away from things that I was just scared of. And I had an epiphany one day, and I said to myself, what am I doing? I need to go back. I'm educated now. I have all this knowledge. I need to make sure that I'm changing this very system that oppressed me, that kept me from resources, and that didn't give me the opportunities that really reached my potential.
Okay, y'all. This is the Dr. Will Show. I didn't know we were about to go to Oprah on y'all today. She went deep. She went deep.
Yes.
Wow. And I hear you know, on that. But, you know, what I have found, and I've done community work, is going back can be very taxing on the soul when you go to people who are still miseducated. And for those who are watching, if you haven't read Dr. Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro, that is foundational knowledge that you have to read. But when you're going back and you're trying to work with people and you're trying to get them to see that this life is nothing. And even those who say, well, hey, man, I'm a player, man. I'm a hustler, man. I'm like, you are, what you call hustling is nickel and dimes compared to those who work on Wall Street or those who are entrepreneurial and they have those businesses and they're making those moves. You know, I interviewed someone who said that you can never pass down a job to your children, but you can pass down a business. And so when I try to speak to them to make that mindset, you know, it can be difficult at times. And, you know, it got to a point where I said, hey, I got to take a step back, you know, because it was too much for me.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So what is culturally responsive teaching? How relevant is it given today's climate? And quite honestly, it's 2017. Why are we still talking about it?
So those are great questions, and they're questions that I think are very loaded. So culturally responsive teaching is something that scholars have used for decades now. You have your godfather of multicultural education, right, which is James Banks. You have Gloria Bidlin-Latson, who really coined the term, Geneva Gay, who've been doing this work for decades. I mean, it came out of the civil rights movement, right? What culturally responsive teaching is, it's a practice that is defined in using cultural characteristics and experiences of students, perspectives of students, of diverse learners, in order to teach them effectively, in order to raise the rigor, master skills, right? So that could look like culturally relevant content. Why are we learning about European history in our classrooms? Just European history, right? That's all I learned about. Did I learn anything about El Salvador? No. How was I supposed to be empowered? How is my identity supposed to be empowered? Why is it that when our Black students learn about their culture, they learn about slavery? And that's it. You know, so it's like, how are we using the real histories of this country, relevant content today, to infuse it in the classrooms and make it relevant to our students? How are we making sure that our own biases and assumptions are not do not come out in our teaching practices with our students? If most of our teaching population are white females, what are their lens? Where are they operating from? What are their experiences? What privileges have they had or not have? And how are they able to connect with our students of color, right? We know, if you look into the history of America and education, education was made to educate and teach like laborers, to promote workers in the field. And then it was really made for a certain group of people during the time, white people. Our society has moved at such a rapid pace, we become so diverse that our schools have not been able to keep up with what our students need. And so now we're talking about, well, our kids of color, they're not, meeting their reading skills, their math skills, the poor kids in the low income communities. We have to find better ways. We have to come up with these charter schools that have no excuses kind of philosophy that tell them how to sit and fold their hands and look up straight and be a certain way to be successful, when that is not true. What's happening is that we are not training our teachers to know how to interact with a different group of people than their own. They cannot relate to a kid's background that might be loud at home. I'm Spanish. My household was loud all the time. I yell sometimes. People think like, why are you yelling? Are you mad? No, I'm just passionate, or whatever you want to call it, or like if a kid doesn't want to look you in the eye, like, some people might look at it as like, oh, that's disrespectful. That might be something that that's part of their culture and part of the way that they interact. So I don't think that we're training teachers to look to do identity work within themselves to be able to connect with the population of students that they're serving. So how can you possibly personalize learning or start using technology tools if you're not culturally responsive? And so I think right now, given the political climate that we're in, I mean, my theory is that the reason we have so many people that act out of ignorance and hate is because they were never taught to unpack stereotypes and assumptions and biases in their lessons. They were never taught to respect other people and cultures. If they were in a homogeneous group or climate or a classroom culture, they were not given windows to see the outside world, which is like, guess what? The world doesn't all look like you. The world looks different. Actually, we're diverse. There are different languages, religions, perspectives, behaviors, and whiteness is not the dominant behavior. Let's break that narrative. Let's step away from that same old story, not only in schools, but in institutions, because quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of it. And it's exhausting to try to talk a certain way and sound proper and not embrace different behaviors, mannerisms, cultures. So it not only starts in our classrooms. If we don't start unpacking it in our classrooms, I think it continues to exist in our societies and our institutions, and we continue to perpetuate it. So we must dismantle it and transform it. And you see what's happening in the United States, right? So I think technology has really changed that and has really put it visible for everybody to see.
So how does a teacher go about developing a culturally responsive curriculum? And where does technology and personalized learning come into play?
Okay, so personalized learning, if you're not culturally responsive, you're not personalizing learning. Because if you're not culturally responsive, then there's no way you'll understand who your students are, where they come from, where they operate, what lens they operate from, what experiences they had. There's no way you're going to personalize that. In order to personalize learning and personalize anything, personalize relationship is to really understand a person and their identity, what their experience has been like, what oppressions they might have lived. Anything from navigating different spaces, acknowledging different privileges. So developing a culturally responsive kind of outlook and curriculum starts with self. If you don't start with self as a teacher, it's going to be difficult for you to bond with your students and understand who they are, especially if you're in diverse setting or city. So I think that really starting with identity development, understanding your own biases, understanding the real history of education, and also the social political context that exists in our country is a good starting point to really understanding how do I build a classroom that is responsive to my students and their needs? How do I build a classroom that makes them feel safe to be who they are and empower them? How do I build a practice that helps me use language that's empowering with my students? That I'm not starting from a deficit of thinking when it comes to my student. Oh, these kids can't make it. Do you know how many times I go into a classroom? They're like, oh, these kids, they just don't want to learn. Their parents don't care. Well, have you ever thought about, maybe their parents do care, but they're working? Did you ever think about that? And so I don't think in some spaces and in my experience, because I could only speak from my from my experience, is that they haven't had that training or that insight to thinking about beyond themselves and really looking into who they are as a teacher in the practice. So I think our trainings and our teacher programs are outdated, and we really need to start thinking about what teacher trainings look like and how it's meeting our diverse population as our society is changing and the population of our students is changing, and we continue to have the same problems. So what are we doing about it?
Now, there are teachers, who are not of color. Their heart is in the right place. And I know they're trying, and they're trying to do these culturally, or in their minds, these activities, these lessons, these programs. But sometimes they make mistakes and missteps. And some have really, quite honestly, gone over the line where you even wonder, like, okay, I have no idea where your thought process was. But what advice do you have to them, and what pitfalls should they avoid?
What have we seen lately in the news? This teacher in Connecticut who posts this picture of, well, I don't know, it was like some sort of lesson around pilgrims, and has this child of color on her knees, like smiling up at her with a chain. Oh no, there's nothing wrong with that. They were doing the pilgrims, and it was really a lesson embedded in blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. What you're doing, you have no sensitivity into like the real history of like the pain and the trauma of a certain group of people. And so that is a perfect example of this intention versus impact. And we talk about this in the work that I do all the time, right? Some people and some teachers have this intention. Oh, I have good intentions. That doesn't matter. The impact is what matters. So you have to be able to call out that impact, and what kind of impact are you having in your classroom with your students? What kind of impact are you having with your employees in an institution? Even if your intention was good, your intention might have been operated from some sort of blind spot that you don't have, or some sort of biases or assumptions or stereotypes. So the intention doesn't matter. What matters is the impact that you do on people. So you need to be aware, and my advice is be aware of the impact that you have when you're making certain decisions around sensitive issues, right? So that's being able to be culturally sensitive and competent. If you know that our history is deeply, we're deeply ingrained in this history of racism, and racism is really in the fabric of our society, then I feel like any teacher would know, let me not do this. Why do I have to have them dress up? Let's have them think critically about this. Was this right to use these ropes at the time? Not right. Let's have the kids do an opinion piece. There's no need. That's very surface level learning. And that kind of learning is dangerous. That's what it is. It's dangerous, and it only perpetuates what we're trying to dismantle, and it only hurts our students. What? That little girl internalized a lot during that. You think she didn't? She did. Even if she's smiling, she's internalizing. She's leaving her education up to you, and you're only, in the end, I think, hurting her and her identity. And she may not notice that now, but she will later on, and she'll think about it, and it'll come back to her, because, you know, there's situations that I've definitely have experienced in my educational journey that I've thought about now, and I'm like, wait a minute, why did my teacher do what she did? So my advice is to start with identity development. My advice is to seek out as much resources as you can. My advice is to be open-minded and to have a mindset that is open and willing to learn more about the real history of your country, and seek out people that you feel might be professionals in this field and ask for advice. So go ahead and do that. Or maybe ask a colleague, what do you think? Do you think this picture would be, I don't know, appropriate to do? And there's tons of resources out there. So try to use them.
Mm. So there's a teacher shortage overall across the country. It is ridiculous. I was reading where Arizona lost 300 teachers before, and we haven't even hit Christmas break yet. And so,
yeah, you're right.
And it's even worse when we talk about teachers of color, particularly Black males and teachers of Asian ancestry. What can be done to improve the recruitment and retention of people of color within the teaching profession?
Again, a very loaded question. We, you know, the work that I do and what I see in the classrooms, it shows me, and it's evidence on why we need more teachers of color. And I was a teacher myself, and I left the field. Why did I leave the field? Because there was some injustices that were done to me. There was a lot of cultural insensitivity going on in my institution that I didn't stand for, and I stood up for myself. So I think we're not creating spaces that support who we are, right? We're in the classrooms and we're trying to do our best, but then we're dealing with the institution part of it, and that's not supporting us enough. There's probably very different areas to answer this question. We know that short term, there's no way we could create this pipeline of teachers of color, right? So in 2 years, we can't increase teachers of color 50%. So that's one area. Then we could think about it in like 10 years. What are we going to do? So we start from high school students, right? But if high school students are not having a good experience in their schools and they're not being trained and gaining the skills, then how could we create a pipeline, right? So a lot of it, I think an immediate short-term solution would be creating training programs for teachers invested in CRT, right? Personalized and blended learning is the goal. We know it works. How could you personalize and use blended learning and technology in the classroom? You got to make sure you're culturally responsive. You got to make sure you are creating a classroom culture and climate that's safe, that promotes identity, interest, and student agency, that promotes differentiation and rigor and mastery. How are you going to do that? By building student relationship. How are you going to do that? By being culturally responsive constantly, all the time. Making sure that you're using a student's identity to implement that in everything you do, your language, your curriculum, how you respond to your students, your learning spaces, and so forth and so forth. So I think as of right now, there are many orgs right now that are trying to tackle this issue. So collaborating with them, thinking about what training programs do you need, and also thinking about the power dynamic nationally. Like, who are the leaders, right, that are saying, everybody's talking about personalized and blended learning, these big organizations that have tons of money. But nobody's saying anything about cultural competency. Nobody's really saying anything about identity work. So here I am, working for an organization that's really centered around technology and innovation. And I'm saying culturally responsive teaching is something that works and needs to be infused in this work. And y'all have to start saying it. But you have to make sure that they're giving people like me and other people of color a seat at the table. We want a seat at the table because we know what works for the students that you're trying to fix. But who are the people in power that are trying to address this problem? Not people that look like our student population. So how are we making sure that we are including all voices to make sure that we're coming up with creative and innovative solutions, So it's a big, like I said, it's a loaded question. I think we have to start thinking from a very innovative perspective, solution-based. And we need to also empower the teachers in the classrooms right now, quite honestly, and helping them think of using them to come up with innovative solutions on tackling this issue. But it's a huge issue to tackle, and I think it starts with the people that know their population the best.
So you co-founded EduLeaders of Color R.I. So I'm assuming that stands for Rhode Island. Please speak to the work that your organization does, and what was the pain point behind creating the organization?
Sure. So we had something in Rhode Island called it was called the Startup Weekend. And Highlander Institute did it in collaboration with 4.0 Schools. And it was like a innovative hub where you brought developers of technology, educators, students, stakeholders in one room. They worked for 50 hours in the weekend to come up with solutions on how to tackle a problem. The problem of this Startup Weekend was culturally relevant content in technology. So I invited a bunch of my friends that I knew from just, around the way in the education field, and everybody came together in one room. We had many people of color. We had developers from Boston, from Switzerland, these tech developers that were like, yeah, we're making all these apps for classrooms, but we don't really know what goes on in the classroom. So we want to hear from you what if our app or our software might work for you. So they teamed up. They did 1 minute pitch. We narrowed it down to about 7 good startup ideas. And then they worked 50 hours straight in teams. They got into teams and tried to solve a problem in education, basically grounded in culturally relevant content. And so we realized that, the space was really empowering people of color and making them think as themselves as innovators and problem solvers. So we said, you know what, in Rhode Island, this does not exist, right? We want to create and cultivate a space where people are invested in social justice. They want to challenge inequities in education. They want to be empowered. I knew that coming from my background, I had very negative kind of experiences that didn't empower me, that didn't include my voice. So I wanted to create a space where people of color can come together, walk in a space, see themselves reflected, be able to network, connect, and think of innovative solutions to solve issues. And then we provided free beer and wine, which is always good. So that was our incentive to get people in one space and relax after the day, come together, have discussions. So we have presentations of org leaders of color and work that's going around in the community. And they do about a 3-minute presentation, totaling up to about 20-30 minutes. People network in the beginning, the presentations take place, and then we leave time for them to connect with people towards the end, and try to think of ways of either collaborating or of tackling something together, or just coming up with an idea. Like maybe we could, work together and really tackle an issue. So we're fairly new. We're still kind of trying to really solidify our identity in Rhode Island. Looking for funding to really take our work forward. We wanna really focus on creating a pipeline for leaders of color and recruiting and retaining teachers in the Providence district. So we have some leadership folks in the district that are really behind this work, and so that's kind of helping us move the work forward. And we're really trying to create an ecosystem in our state that supports who we are.
Okay. So when people attend your meetups, what can they expect to see and experience?
Some free wine and food. Also, just people that look like them, people that they haven't met. So many times we're a small state and we have a lot of different nonprofits across. So we do a lot of work around equity and social justice. And a lot of times people are not aware of what's going on. So one of our big focus is creating social capital. So as certain people move to these leadership positions, we want to make sure that people are meeting each other and that they're able to support each other. And if there are job opportunities, we could, EduLeaders of Color is a platform. So we're able to connect folks, good folks and talented folks to different positions. And so they could just see a lot of good folks in one room, folks of color, folks that are really invested in this work, folks that that might be exhausted because this work is transformative, and so physically and mentally is exhausting. So just being able to be in one space and talk about things is really just smooth to the soul, and kind of alleviating. So it's just a place to be yourself without putting a mask on. We invite everybody. We invite allies into our spaces as well, but we do make sure that they understand that the space is specifically focused on historically and marginalized people of color.
So what do you hope people take away from the work that EduLeaders R.I. does, and what do you want your legacy to be?
I hope that people take away from us that we're really invested and authentic in the work that we're doing. And ultimately, I think that in this field of education, a lot of times we forget that we're doing this. Who are we doing this for? And we're doing this for students. We're doing this for our kids. We're doing it for our youth. And a lot of times I think that, like I said, we forget that. We forget the why behind the work that we're doing. We get caught up with trying to be the top organization or trying to get recognition or trying to make the most money. And it's easily forgotten that the kids are at the center of this all. So what I hope that people take away from us is that we're really invested authentically and wholeheartedly in this work. And our legacy is that we're dismantling systems and we're building it up again. So we're breaking down systems that are oppressive, that are racist, and that are built on white supremacy. And that we're doing it in a way that is effective, that is bringing folks together, and that allows folks of color to really take lead on the work invested in our own communities. I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of people that don't know anything about our communities trying to save our communities. So that's what I want our legacy to be.
Awesome. Awesome. So before you go, what is your call to action for those individuals who they're thinking about stepping into leadership within their school or organization, but they're shying away from it because they have lost faith in our institutions to make change?
Ooh. So remember when we first started this conversation, I said I had an intense day because part of me, I'm tired of institutions. I really am. I'm exhausted. A lot of times I want to step away and do my own work because I don't feel like I have the support that I wanted to. So this is actually a very personal question right now, given this moment and given what I've experienced today and the work that I'm trying to push and the work that I try to push every single day for not only myself, but for our students, is that my call for action is to collaborate with people doing this work. My call to action is to not quit, to continue to voice why it's important, to stand up, to speak your truth, to speak your voice. And then when you have that power, to spread that power to those that need it, to those that will do the same as you would do. So, losing faith in institutions, in a way I have already. What I haven't lost faith in is people like myself and people that are really hearing and doing the work that I'm doing. So that's why I think it's important to continue to voice this work, to own it, and to spread it. It's exhausting. It's exhausting, but get a glass of wine and get up in the morning and do it again.
Okay. Well, I'm Muslim, so there will be no consumption of alcoholic beverages on my end.
My bad.
But I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your passion for the work that you're doing. It's obvious for what I'm hearing and what people will hear throughout the interview that you truly care and really want to do the work and make a change. People, you know how I do this. This is going up on SoundCloud, iTunes. I need you to subscribe, leave some reviews. It's going up on YouTube as well. Subscribe. Tell Carla she's doing a bang up job. People, come on, do it.
Woo, woo.
And this is going on. It's going up. I'm going to put a blog post up at www.drwheelshow.com, and I'm going to pop this on Twitter and LinkedIn. So I share this amongst all the channels.
I'm gonna tweet it.
Awesome. The first thing I'm going to do after this is upload this to SoundCloud and such, and then tweet the audio out, and then you can share that. So people, again, I want to thank you, Carla, for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. And if you're ever in Rhode Island, definitely hit me up.
I will. It was very interesting when I went to Rhode Island because coming from Mississippi, Boston and New York were just so like, wow. But then as I was going, upstate New York, And then I hit Maine, and I've been to Vermont. And then I went to Rhode Island. I'm like,
beautiful.
I like, this is just Mississippi, but cold. Like, this is just just like a little smaller space. The cold got me. You know,
it's cold. It's cold.
Yeah, it's.
I know. I don't belong here.
Which shocked me. You know, when I lived in Boston, I'm like, them Africans up in here, Latino communities up in here. I said, who told everybody to show up in this city, right? I'm like,
I know.
Y'all should be back in the Mississippi where
it's so stupid.
The weather is more comfortable.
For real.
You know, to you. So
yeah, but like I lived in Atlanta and I could not breathe. Like it was too hot. You know what I'm saying? So I need to be by the water. See, I'm a water girl, so I need the water. But down there it was like no water. I couldn't breathe. It was so hot.
Yeah, we do it like this. It was odd. Well, it was odd, but it was interesting when it's the which is the largest educational technology conference in the world.
Yep.
Went to San Antonio about 4 or 5 years ago. And people from the north were like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And people from the south were, they're like laughing. They're like, this is normal for us. Like this is some day, So that was interesting.
Yeah.
People, thank you people for watching.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. So people, as always, invest in you, EduLeaders. Peace.